around the country hold their survival code of millions of species, protecting the valuable assets for humankind. Forest conservation and the holistic conservation and restoration of mountain, river, forest, farmland, lake, grassland, and desert ecosystems are bringing back lucid waters, lush mountains, blue sky, and white clouds.
像保护眼睛一样保护自然和生态环境。这个理念在中国深入人心。在这里，曾经灭绝的麋鹿不但恢复了种群数量，还被成批野化放归大自然。
Thanks to the unremitting efforts by China, many extinct or endangered wild species are regaining confidence and dignity. The elevation of Yunnan varies from 70 meters to 6,700 meters. It's a kingdom of animals and plants. People's efforts to protect biological diversity is speeding up at the moment. China is taking...
Dear Ministers, distinguished delegates, welcome back to the evening plenary of the second day of the high-level segment. We will carry on with the list of speakers, and we will be hearing some pre-recorded video statements. The first speaker is Minister of Australia, Tanya Plibersek. She will be followed by Sudan. You have the floor, Minister.
So microphone two. Oh yeah, that's red.
Okay.
That's red. Yeah.
Whenever you are ready, Minister.
As is our custom in Australia, I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the traditional owners of the area of Montreal, all First Nations people who are represented at this conference, and in particular I pay my respects to Australia's First Nations people who have managed our land and sea country for over 65,000 years. As Australians, we know how lucky we are with an island continent to call our home and some of the most spectacular biodiversity on Earth. We also recognise our responsibility as a megadiverse nation with an abundance of plants and animals found only in Australia to play a leading role at this historic meeting and in the agreements that will be forged here in Montreal. We understand the stakes at this conference and we share its driving vision, a world that is net zero and nature positive. A world that is winning the fight against climate change on a path to net zero carbon pollution while living in harmony with the natural resources that sustain us all. Australia has made substantial changes in the last 6 months. One of our first acts as a new government was to lift Australia's climate ambition, setting higher targets for emissions reductions by 2030 with a clear path to net zero by 2050. Australia is working with the private sector to design out waste and pollution, keeping materials in use and fostering markets to achieve a circular economy by 2030. Just last week, we announced our new Nature Positive Plan for Australia to protect our biodiversity, to stop new extinctions and to reverse the damage that's already been done. As part of this plan, We will establish a new Environment Protection Agency. We will protect 30% of our land and 30% of our sea by 2030. We'll design a new nature repair market to encourage private investment in conservation, protection and restoration. We will reform our national environment laws from the ground up, taking them from nature negative, where they were simply managing a decline in our environment, to nature positive, where we'll protect our land and sea and leave it in a better state than we found it. Transforming Australia from nature negative to nature positive, that's what we're seeking to do. To turn the tide in our country from over 2 centuries of the destruction of nature to a future of nature repair. But we know, of course, that no single nation can do this alone. That's why global agreements and conferences like this are so important. It's why clear targets and strong goals and mutual support are also so vital. Australia stands ready to lift our ambition, to support our friends and partners, particularly in the Pacific, and to face the most critical challenges facing humanity today. Can I finish by thanking the People's Republic of China for your leadership and Canada for your hospitality at this 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
I thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to Ambassador of Sudan, Taghi Hassan Absalih, who will be followed by Grenada. Ambassador, you have the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. President of COP-15, ministers, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. At the outset, on behalf of the government of the Republic of the Sudan, I would like to congratulate the People's Republic of China for presiding over this conference. I also thank the Government of Canada for hosting this meeting. Allow us also to thank the Secretariat of the Convention for their efforts to prepare the conference documents. Mr. President, biodiversity loss is a challenge for humanity. Therefore, we need to make further efforts to address direct and indirect causes of biodiversity loss in a comprehensive manner. We must take urgent measures to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. We also need to address drivers of climate change and land degradation. We also call for providing further resources to developing countries to address these changes. We reaffirm that we will fully cooperate as a party to the Convention towards the adoption of a global biodiversity framework, which is our opportunity to provide a healthier and more sustainable planet for future generations and all biodiversity on Earth. Mr. President, the absence of means of implementation, sufficient means of implementation, continues to be an obstacle for the implementation of the Convention and the strategic plan by developing countries. Therefore, we highlight the need to strengthen international cooperation so that we can implement the global biodiversity framework at the national level. The effective implementation in developing countries of its obligations pursuant to the Convention relies on the efficient implementation by advanced countries or developed countries of their obligations pursuant to this Convention in terms of financial resources, transfer of technology and knowledge. Therefore, we need to increase funding to developing countries so that they can implement fully the global biodiversity framework to achieve the 2050 vision, living in harmony with nature. Our lands are the habitat for biodiversity. We are committed to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to provide sustainable support so that we can implement the objectives of the Convention to preserve biodiversity and use it in a sustainable way in order to guarantee access and benefit sharing of genetic resources. We also look forward to a complete participation by developing countries in conferences of the parties and intersessional meetings. The use of genetic resources is a use of biodiversity. Therefore, we are committed to access and benefit sharing. We also need to take measures to make sure that countries are capable to access and benefit from digital sequence information by making sure that digital sequence information is mainstreamed in building capacity. Therefore, these DSI are an important element in the global biodiversity framework. In conclusion, we look forward for the adoption of a global biodiversity framework, and we look forward to projects that would guarantee biodiversity. If we have political will, if we have a spirit of cooperation, we will be able to find solutions in order to bring our perspectives together. Together, we can achieve the objectives of this conference. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your statement. I now give the floor to Ministerial Advisor, Ministry of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy of Grenada, Ms. Joyce Thomas. She will be followed by South Africa. You have the floor, ma'am.
Okay, so. Thank you, Mr. President, Executive Secretary. Grenada wishes to thank the government of the People's Republic of China and the Canadian government for facilitating our participation and the Secretariat for their hard work. Distinguished delegates, Grenada is firmly focused on implementation. To this end, we have 4 key points to share. First, the vulnerabilities of small island developing states require not only special but urgent attention from the world community. Grenada calls for review and strengthening of the program of work on island biodiversity that focuses on addressing and supporting implementation of the work program for seeds in the GBF. Secondly, implementation requires access to resources. We must address the need to provide adequate and predictable means of implementation, including mobilization of new and additional financial resources, and in accordance with Article 20. Grenada recognizes the important fiduciary role of the GEF and calls for an increase in resources to GEF, including from new sources and innovative mechanisms. Grenada believes funding for capacity building should not be prescriptive, and countries should be allowed to apply those funds in a way that best addresses their needs, including for institutional capacity strengthening to access financing. The value of needs assessment and national resources is also recognized. Thirdly, any benefits arising from the use of DSI on genetic resources must be shared in a fair and equitable way. Grenada does not consider open access to mean free access to DSI. Technology transfer, capacity building, and scientific cooperation must be jointly addressed, and new resource mobilization must be an integral part of the solution on DSI, on genetic resources. We support recognition and inclusion of rights of IPLCs to derive benefits on genetic resources associated with traditional knowledge. Fourth, Grenada is concerned about the adverse impacts to our precious island biodiversity, including our spices, brought on by rapid developments in biotechnology, including the use and release of synthetic biology organisms, components, and products. For us, regular horizon scanning, assessment, and a monitoring process are key. Grenada urges all parties to acknowledge already agreed obligations on synthetic biology and to support inclusion of relevant language under Target 17 of the GBF. Finally, It is our common but differentiated responsibility to safeguard the natural world and to ensure the future of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the Director General, Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries of South Africa, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, who will be followed by Bahrain. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, South Africa joins others in thanking the People's Republic of China and the Government of Canada for hosting the 15th Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Let me begin my statement with a quote from our iconic late President Nelson Mandela. I quote, "Africa's rich natural landscape is unlike any other in the world. The right to a healthy environment is a crucial human right because it directly impacts our quality of life. Often, it is the most vulnerable that suffers most in the face of environmental abuse." South Africa, as a mega-diverse country, together with other developing countries, carries the apportioned burden in implementing the convention. It is for this reason that South Africa would like to reiterate the importance of the following. Firstly, the adoption of the ambitious global biodiversity framework that balances the three objectives of the convention with commensurate means of implementation, which must cover all aspects of the convention and its protocol. Secondly, the establishment of a dedicated global diversity fund as a financial mechanism to provide predictable, adequate, and timely flows of funds to developing countries to support the full implementation of the global biodiversity framework, and this is critical. Thirdly, furthermore, South Africa calls for the reform of multilateral development banks and the international financial institution to align and scale up funding to developing countries in order to ensure simplified access and mobilize biodiversity financing from various sources. Fourthly, we support an ambitious global target on area-based conservation, also referred to as 30 by 30. This expansion should address all ecosystems, including terrestrial, marine, coastal, inland waters. The financing allocated towards the expansion of conservation estate must also enhance effective and equitable governance as well as management of both existing and additional conservation areas. We call for consideration of priorities, circumstances, and capacity building of developing countries, as well as recognition of the rights of indigenous people. We also agree that the post-20 GBF should include a solution for the DSI. Mr. President, you will be pleased to hear that South Africa's policies are closely aligned to objectives of the Convention of Biological Diversity and is therefore positioned to respond to the implementation of the GBF. In closing, South Africa reiterates its support to secure a new deal for people and nature. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I now give the floor to the Acting Director of Biodiversity Directorate of Bahrain, Ms. Nouf Ali Wasmi, to be followed by Israel. I give you the floor. Bahrain.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to express to you, Mr. President, China, Canada, and the Secretariat with our gratitude and thanks for the valuable efforts exerted in convening this very important conference. It is my pleasure today to be here among my brothers and sisters, welcoming you all to move forward in supporting efforts for more concerted international action towards achieving a joint vision to live in harmony with nature to ensure sustainability of our resources, the resources of our planet for the future generations. Mr. President, this conference comes with an ambitious vision towards a promising future for our environment, despite all the challenges and the alarming figures related to the degradation in habitats and lands. If we go back to the global assessment of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems, we see that the livelihood of 3.2 billion people are affected by the degradation of lands, including 1.3 billion people living in conditions of food insecurity. This had led to the creation of crises of biodiversity that we are witnessing today. The Living Planet Index report of 2020, published by GEF, shows that between the years of 1970 to 2016, there was an approximate decline of 68% in terms of species that are under risk, whether in terms of mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this situation that we live today requires us to all work together with a clear mechanism and in concerted and coordinated manner among all countries to mitigate the negative impact that are threatening the biodiversity on Earth. As such, we had adopted a package of initiatives and ambitious national plans that aim at achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those related to protection of biodiversity and mitigating the negative impact of climate change, including, inter alia, the following. Bahrain had launched an ambitious national plan to increase the number of trees in Bahrain up to 3.6 million trees by 2035 by adopting sustainable agricultural methods and choosing kinds of plants that are capable of living in the desert climate. We also are working on increasing the number of mangroves by fourfold by the year 2035. And Bahrain had announced recently one of the largest marine protected areas in the region with a total area of 1,330 square kilometers in line with the relevant Aichi targets. Mr. President, in addition to these national efforts, I would also like to commend the regional initiatives in the Middle East that embody the spirit of cooperation towards a better future for the region. Most prominent of these initiatives is the Green Middle East initiative launched by Saudi Arabia that aims at planting 50 billion trees, and the Mangrove Alliance for Climate that was launched by UAE in partnership with Indonesia. These regional efforts would leave a clear impact in finding an integrated mechanism to benefit from the regional and international knowledge and sciences to have solutions for the environment that would mitigate the degradation of land and enhance the restoration more effectively. We believe that this innovative method that would direct us towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals would be based on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework on the basis of a contribution by all countries. And thank you for your attention.
I thank you for your intervention, and I now give the floor to the Senior Deputy Director General of Natural Resources of Israel, Dr. Netta Lipman, to be followed by Malaysia. Israel, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at COP-27 last month, and here again at COP-15 today, the world is racing to find solutions for the existential threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. Maintaining healthy and resilient ecosystem will secure the future of humankind and is essential for tackling climate change and for preventing pandemics as well. Thus, setting ambitious goals and measurable targets for protecting biodiversity is the key for successful GBF. For this reason, Israel supports the 30 by 30 global target and has joined the High Ambition Coalition and the Global Ocean Alliance. We will also support ambitious targets for ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions. Israel has taken important strides since COP-15 in Kunming. For instance, we have declared 34 additional nature reserves, pushing up toward 27% of strictly protected land ecosystem. Our Open Space Restoration Fund has funded hundreds of projects around the country. This is our unique tool to funding large-scale ecological restoration financed by 1% of all state land sales. These actions include river restoration and rewilding of aquatic habitat that play a key role in strengthening Israel's bird migration paths. Israel has also been successful in encountering of business sector to adopt biodiversity consideration in their business models. In the marine environment, we have succeeded in protecting the unique Palmachim slide in the Mediterranean Sea last September. As a high-populated country, we put strong emphasis on connectivity, and just last month, we have published new master plan to protect the most threatened ecological corridor in the country. We also strongly support green and blue spaces in urban environment. Our vision is that by 2030, every municipality will have an urban nature plan, and we are already halfway there. Biodiversity crisis has reached a critical point in time. We owe nature and people a new ambition GBF. After COP-15, member states need to do everything in their power to implement it. Thank you.
I thank your intervention, and next I give the floor to the Undersecretary for Biodiversity Management Division of the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change in Malaysia, Mr. Naim bin Akman, to be followed by the Seychelles. Malaysia, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of Malaysia, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the governments of the People's Republic of China and Canada for organizing this important ministerial meeting. Mr. President, Malaysia's journey in achieving sustainable development has always been the national government's priority. The eradication of poverty is as important as sustaining economic growth. Hence, Malaysia has been taking comprehensive measures to ensure that the country's economic development did not come at undue sacrifice of its natural resources. As one of the 17 mega-diverse countries in the world, Malaysia has always prioritized biodiversity conservation alongside economic development. With that in mind, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is very important to us. We need the framework to be both ambitious and implementable. Hence, the goals and the targets that we are agreeing to here must be taking into account not only national but subnational and local circumstances. We must not forget that when we return to our respective countries, it is our responsibility to convince local stakeholders through effective mainstreaming activities. Mr. President, Excellencies, as the global community now realizes that biodiversity knows no borders, I call upon the CBD Secretariat, developed countries, private sector, and friends from all around the world to support developing countries with guidance documents, technical assistance, and adequate financial resources. I am pleased to share that efforts are underway to amend Malaysia's policy on biological diversity 2016-2025 to ensure the policy is in line with the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Malaysia is prepared to use the framework on our path to live in harmony with nature by 2050. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you for your statement, and now I give the floor to the Principal Secretary for Environment of Seychelles, Ms. Dennis Matatikan, to be followed by the Dominican Republic. Seychelles, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, Seychelles thanks the government of China for the presidency and the warm hospitality of the government of Canada for hosting us for this COP. As our time in Montreal draws to an end, we must realize that our focus is to halt and reverse global biodiversity loss to guarantee our future and that of our planet. Biodiversity is integral to our society's prosperity, well-being, and continued existence. 90% of Seychelles' GDP originating from tourism and fisheries are dependent on a healthy environment. Biodiversity loss will significantly impact our daily lives, increase our vulnerabilities, and reduce our resilience. The GBF presents an opportunity to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and to build a pathway towards achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. The goals and targets of the GBF should be streamlined and clear to ensure successful implementations. Seychelles has come to this COP with the intent to adopt and provide support to this new framework. Delaying the adoption and implementation of the GBF will not only exacerbate the loss of biodiversity, but also affect our ability to thrive. Seychelles, as with other states, are at the front line and are already impacted by the adverse effect of biodiversity loss. This is why Seychelles joined the Seeds Coalition for Nature to unify our voice and to ensure that the concerns on the vulnerabilities and special circumstances of seeds are heard at the global level. As a co-lead of the coalition, we echo statements made by Samoa and Cabo Verde. We appreciate the commitment made by the friend countries to support the coalition. The Seeds Coalition for Nature will play a catalytic role to facilitate partnership between the international community and seeds and further guide support on the means of implementation for seeds. Means of implementation is of great concern to seeds. Lack of financial resources, capacity, and technological transfer are the main barriers to implementation. A fair and fast-seeing resource mobilization package must be agreed together with the GBF to ensure successful implementation. Financial flows should be from international, public, and private sources. Consideration should be given to the special circumstances and vulnerabilities of seeds when assessing these sources of funding. While parties like Seychelles commits limited national resources and pioneer innovative financing solutions, such as debt for nature swaps and blue bonds towards biodiversity, it is still not sufficient, and international funding can help reduce the financing gap. Seychelles supports the creation of a new global biodiversity fund dedicated to GBF's implementation. Seychelles recognizes the roles of biodiversity in climate change mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. Through our national determined contribution, we commit the protection of mangroves and seagrass ecosystem. Seychelles reaffirmed its commitment to the High Ambition Coalition and the Global Ocean Alliance to ensure that the 30 by 30 target is achieved. With 32.6% of our economic exclusive zone and 48.2% of our land protected, Seychelles provide the world with an evolving case study of how 30 by 30 can be implemented. Whilst we recognize that this is a global target, we do urge all parties to remain ambitious and come to an agreement to deliver on this target. We must ensure that we leave Montreal with a clear direction and a global biodiversity framework that can halt and reverse biodiversity loss. If we want to live in harmony with nature, we must also listen to the most vulnerable, work together, and be committed to achieve successful results. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you for your statement. The Secretariat told me that the representative of the Dominican Republic is not present, so we'll invite the next speaker, the Director General of the Environmental Governance in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Madagascar, Mr. Raza Findrab Rinad.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We wish to congratulate the government of the People's Republic of China for the excellent organization of this conference, as well as the government and the people of Canada for their warm welcome. As you know, Madagascar is home to 5% of the global biodiversity. This biodiversity for us is of crucial importance and is also crucial for the world due to the economic and social dependence upon it. Also, the development of sustainable economic activities without prejudice to natural resources is a priority strategic option in combating biodiversity loss. We thus support an ambitious post-2020 GBF, as well as other activities in mainstreaming biodiversity by ensuring the involvement of the private sector, which must contribute more to the process of sustainable management of biodiversity. Ladies and gentlemen, Madagascar supports the proposal aiming at protecting 30% of land and marine areas on the planet by 2030. However, this must go hand in hand with an effective strategy for socioeconomic development through sustainable means. Regarding restoration, Madagascar is following its plan for Madagascar, entitled Madagascar is Green, and as a member of the AFR 100, is aiming to ramp up its restoration of the ecosystems. Moreover, being a country very rich in biodiversity, we plan to effectively implement the Nagoya Protocol on ABS. Ladies and gentlemen, we place great hope in a global fund dedicated to biodiversity, which will be necessary for the effective implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The effectiveness of this framework depends on access to financing, to competencies and the necessary capacities, as well as to win-win partnerships and the recognition of the rights and benefits of all actors, including local communities and the private sector. Together, we can leave a heritage to future generations. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for your statement. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Kamaye Mazou, Executive Secretary of the National Council of Environment for Sustainable Development of Niger, to be followed by the representative of Tajikistan.
Excellence.
Your Excellency, for the Minister of Ecology, from China, and Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Niger, to thank the governments of the People's Republic of China and of Canada, as well as the Secretary of the Convention of Biological Diversity, for the perfect organization of the event that brings us here. Let me also recall the words of Martin Luther King Jr. in his book titled, What Now? Chaos or Community? Who said in 1967, in another context, and I quote, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. We cannot escape the fact that tomorrow is already here. We are faced with acute urgency of the now, and in this enigma that is unfolding before us, making life and history, we cannot afford to delay. We can beg for time to suspend its flight, but it heeds no grievance and continues without slowing down. Over the bleached bones and ruins of many civilizations, these words are pathetic and come too late. End of quote. This is to say that in view of the issues that bring us together here, the responsibility that weighs on our shoulders is immense. The scale of these issues and their interdependence require a cross-cutting approach that goes beyond the simple framework. Or together, we have to adopt ambitious goals. And just as the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez, has said at the opening of this COP-15, if we do not act, there will be no planet B. Our task is therefore heavy and overwhelming, because we must make decisions here that will determine the future of our planet. We must recognize that we must act quickly, including rethinking our consumption and production patterns. We have to develop a reflex to consume less and better. We have to revisit our relationship with the environment, with nature, in order to reverse the trend of erosion of biological diversity, an integral part of humanity's natural heritage, which must be protected absolutely for present and future generations. So together, we must lay the foundations for a healthy and prosperous planet in which all peoples are able to live in harmony with nature. Can we live up to this challenge? The results of our exchanges in the next days will show. But the Niger would like to spend a moment to reflect on this and step back from the minutiae of the documents and the words we are struggling with. Ladies and gentlemen, Niger believes that we need more than words. We need concrete actions, and we need them now, because there is no time to waste, and that is why Niger advocates frank international collaboration between all stakeholders as the best way to achieve the post-2020 global framework for biodiversity. Niger aligns itself with the ECOWAS that has clearly supported the need for an ambitious response to biodiversity loss at COP-27. And Niger will want to protect 30% of land and oceans by 2030, to close the finance gap by 2030, and put an end to wildlife extinction. This session must take clear decisions on these matters. We cannot wait any longer. And I cannot end without mentioning the case of my country, Niger. The areas covered by protected areas, classified forests that total some 19,300,000 hectares, representing. So we apologize. We are out of time. I can assure you that measures are already being taken so that we can devote resources to decentralization and down to the community and narrow the gaps. Now, these initiatives cannot be carried out without the partnerships and technical assistance. It's why Niger is making a strong appeal to rich countries to listen to us poor countries and to support us in carrying out our own ambitions to protect biodiversity and ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement and your cooperation. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Dulovasho Dutsoda, CBD National Focal Point of Tajikistan, to be followed by the representative of CAR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the government of the Republic of Tajikistan, it's a great honor for me to address the 15th Conference of the Parties of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. And taking this opportunity, I would like to thank the government of Canada for hospitality and the People's Republic of China for great organization of the conference, as well the Secretariat of the Convention on Biodiversity for usual support of parties. Tajikistan, as a mountainous landlocked country, forms about 60% of the water resources of Central Asia, and with a unique and rich biodiversity, occupies a leading position in the Central Asia region in terms of availability of genetic resources. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to address both the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, Tajikistan has created an extensive network of specially protected natural areas. The total area of protected areas in Tajikistan has increased from 2.8% in 1991 to 22% in 2021 of the territory of the country. Recognizing the global target to protect at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030, and taking into account the extensive protected areas capacity, Tajikistan is planning to establish the transboundary protected areas with neighboring countries and thus ensure achieving the global target. Distinguished delegates, recognizing also the Kunming Declaration, Tajikistan welcomes collaboration and coordination actions with ongoing multilateral environmental agreements and the biodiversity-related conventions to promote the nexus of biodiversity with other thematic areas that are critical for conservation, loss and damage, resource mobilization, and livelihood of local people. Tajikistan believes that post-2020 global biodiversity framework's ambitious plans will implement broad-based action to bring about a transformation in society's relationship with biodiversity, ensuring that by 2050 the shared vision of living in harmony with nature is fulfilled. As soon as the global biodiversity framework is adopted, the issue of resource mobilization will be the core issue, and of course, without the necessary resources like finance, capacity building, and technology transfer, the achievement of the assigned task can take many years. Therefore, for many developing countries and countries with economies in transition, the proactive assistance of the international community is in great demand. Excellencies, given the national circumstances, Tajikistan would like to urge for more focus on resource mobilization, enhanced accessibility, and clear delivery plan for biodiversity financing, and accelerate the progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for the countries with economies in transition. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your statement. Now I'd like to give the floor to the head of delegation of the Central African Republic, to be followed by the representative of Guinea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me, on the outset, to express my gratitude to the Government of Canada for the hospitality given to all those delegations here at COP-15, and at the same time express my congratulations to the Chinese presidency for having organized this COP. I also wish to take this opportunity to share the wishes of the President of the Central African Republic and the government as a whole on the adoption of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework that is ambitious. Mr. President, today we must end the erosion of biodiversity. Despite geopolitical and economic tensions, it is essential that we reach an ambitious agreement allowing us to stop the erosion of biodiversity. Situated in the center of the African continent with a very large surface area, the CAR has 5 million inhabitants. We have rich biodiversity with 7 main ecosystems: aquatic systems, isles, mountains, forests, wetlands, and agricultural systems. We see in this rich biodiversity more than 5,000 types of flora, of which 3,600 have been identified, 698 species of birds, to name but a few. Although we have natural resources and land that the Central African Republic is counting on to develop, the Central African Republic's biodiversity continues to degrade, as well as the lands are degrading. Therefore, we have set out an ambitious goal to restore 1 million hectares of degraded land or deforested land, and more than 3 million hectares by 2030. This is under the Bonn Challenge to restore 150 million hectares by 2050 and millions of hectares of land by 2030 throughout the world. There are 6 national parks in the Central African Republic, 11 animal reserves, and millions of hectares of protected areas, as well as 6 specific areas that have been protected. The CAR has also, in 2020, adopted a law prohibiting the production and use of plastic packaging in the Republic, which allows us to decrease the use of plastics and improve the lives of animals in the country. We have also supporting the ILO decree on indigenous peoples and has created an ABS for genetic resources framework for its country. We will require additional resources, and this is why we support the African position to create a biodiversity fund and a strategy within a framework of resource mobilization. Ladies and gentlemen, there are but a few days left before the closure of COP-15. In order to stop and reverse this decline, the global biodiversity framework must be similar to the Paris Climate Change Agreement in its importance and its impact. And finally, the Central African Republic commits to living in harmony with nature by 2050, and it will carry out urgent, unprecedented efforts to protect its natural resources and world over the next decade. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the CBD National Focal Point of Guinea, to be followed by the representative of Jamaica.
Monsieur
Mr. President of COP-15 of the CBD, ladies and gentlemen, G'day would like to thank the Secretariat of the Convention Secretariat of the Convention for Biological Diversity, and would like to thank the governments of China and Canada for the organization of the 15th conference. We are persuaded that COP15 will be a very important time to reverse the trends worldwide. In Guinea, ecosystem services are essential for the livelihoods of the Ghanaian and West African populations, especially for food, freshwater supply, non-timber forest products, and the protection of the coastal areas from flooding. Guinea wishes to firmly commit itself to the objectives of the post-2020 framework for biodiversity. Thus, it's committed to protect 30% of marine and terrestrial areas by 2030. And in the extension and consolidation of its network of protected areas by the creation of 17 terrestrial, marine, and coastal national parks, complemented by a series of natural reserves. And this network will be based both on the country's historical protected areas and on the various assessments carried out with its partners on ecological importance and contributions to climate change adaptation and the mitigation of climate change. This network will have as an objective to foster ecosystems for the population's benefits, but also to develop green jobs in the management of these protected areas. This initiative, launched during COP15, will be done with the country's partners. The foundations for the management of such network are being consolidated with the official creation of the Office of Guinea des Parcs Nationaux and Wildlife Reserves. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Ghanaian government, in accordance with the vision of His Excellency, the President of the Transition, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, is committed to the implementation of the Global Framework for Biodiversity post-2020 and wants a framework that will be conducive to the well-being and the development of vulnerable populations. Long live the Rio Conventions, long live international cooperation. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the High Commissioner of Jamaica to Canada, Ms. Sharon Miller. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I express our gratitude to the governments of China and Canada for organizing and hosting this COP. The Kunming Declaration provides a strong basis for the international community to achieve consensus and take ambitious steps towards a shared future for all life on Earth. With limited time to achieve global climate targets, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, urgent, enhanced, and accelerated action is required to strengthen ecosystems' resilience in SIDS such as Jamaica. Jamaica is currently implementing a combination of measures aimed at halting and reversing biodiversity loss, including increasing its terrestrial, inland waters, as well as coastal and marine areas under legal protection. Ecosystems restoration, particularly mangrove forest and seagrass beds, invasive alien species management, and mainstreaming the sustainable ocean and blue economies. Over the last 2 years, the government of Jamaica has declared 3 new land and seascapes as protected areas. These new designations have increased the country's terrestrial and marine protected areas network to 25% and 14% respectively. The new protected areas are the Cockpit Country Protected Area, approximately 78,000 hectares, the Black River Protected Areas, which includes the Black River Lower Morass, Jamaica's first wetland designated under the Ramsar Convention, Pedro Keys and surrounding waters, main habitat for the queen conch. In the current year, the Cabinet will be asked to approve the designation of 17 ecological and biologically sensitive areas. These designations will support Jamaica's commitment to the 30 by 30 target as a member of the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature and the Global Ocean Alliance. In keeping with the United Nations Decade of Ecosystems Restoration, a number of ecosystems restoration projects are currently being undertaken, namely, restoration of approximately 0.12 hectare of mangrove forests along the roadway in the Palisados Port Royal Protected Area, restoration of 57.1 hectares of the mangrove wetland at Winds Morass, Trelawney, and at the inland bog within the Mesa River Protected Area, restoration of approximately 1,600 hectares of wetland area in southern Clarendon, and approximately 20 hectares of wetland within the Mason River Protected Area. The government of Jamaica is committed to ensuring the development, adoption, and implementation of an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework that includes the provision of necessary means of implementation in line with the Convention to reverse any identified loss of biodiversity and ensure that biodiversity is on a path to recovery by 2030 and towards the full realization of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Mr. President, Jamaica remains committed to play her part in realizing this global vision. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Kyrgyzstan. You have the floor.
Microphone to Kyrgyzstan.
请把麦克风给
Microphone to the representative of Kyrgyzstan.
Microphone to Kyrgyzstan, please.
有吗？没有的话，我们现在
If the representative of Kyrgyzstan is not present, we move on to hearing the statements from.
Tell him not to touch.
Dear ladies and gentlemen,
是吉尔吉
Is that the representative of Kyrgyzstan taking the floor? You have the floor.
dear Chairman and dear Head of Delegation, I am glad to be here today representing the Kyrgyz Republic in the 15th Conference of the Parties UN Convention on Biological Diversity. With 94% of territory covered by the mountains of the Kyrgyz Republic, showing leadership, making the efforts for raise awareness about the mountains regions and its recognized their uniqueness. Kyrgyzstan countries advocate the position of the mountains countries before the international community. In this context, until 2030, we are expected to make a series of political decisions, increase scientific research, public actions, and financial investment. Kyrgyzstan launched the national campaign Jashil Muras with the framework of the International Year Sustainable Mountain Development and the Year of the Protection Mountain Ecosystems and the Climate Resilience. According to the plan, Kyrgyzstan will plant 5 million annually throughout the country and implement programs of vulnerable sectors of the such agriculture, energy, implement the programs of vulnerable sectors. The country plans to host the Bishkek 25 Global Summit in 2027. We propose the development of adaptation special targets program on the mountain ecosystem under the UN. I appeal to the international community to support this initiative, to accelerate the support mountain countries and international fund of the protection mountain ecosystem. Given this context, our country is strongly committed to the above-mentioned initiative. Good example is the Aspen Declaration, New Impulse for the Mountain, where the Kyrgyz Republic proposed the 5-year action plan for the development of the mountain regions. Dear head of delegations, protection of the noble snow leopard from the exciting has been of the few successful international initiatives. Let me remind you that in 2013 and 2017, our country held the global forums of the conservation of snow leopards and mountain ecosystem. This year, Kyrgyzstan hosted the 7th meeting of the Steering Committee on the Global Snow Leopard Ecosystem Protection Program, representative environment ministers from the 12 range countries. Recently, the UN General Assembly supported our initiative and adopted the resolution, Nature No Borders, which among the issues noted the importance of multilateral cooperation for the effective implementation of the UN Convention of Biological Diversity. Dear participants, our country prioritized the protection of special nature areas and habitats that the home of many animals, plants listed in the Red Book. We also recognize the value of ethnical, inclusive, and just conservation efforts involving local communities. The Kashkasu Statement of the Global Biodiversity Conservation issued by the world-leading conservationists in the small village of the Kyrgyz Republic. In conclusion, in my speech, I would like to reiterate that the Kyrgyz Republic is open, active international cooperation because on belief that we can preserve the biodiversity of our planet and achieve the desired sustainable development in harmony with the environment only through the joint efforts. Thank you for the attention.
I thank you for your statement. Now let's hear statements from international organizations. I appeal to you to limit your statements to under 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, Mr. Stefania Nawadra. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, COP President. All protocols observed. Let me start by wishing everyone who's still here a warm Pacific welcome from the sunny Pacific. I thank the People's Republic of China and Canada for your wonderful hosting of this much-awaited COP-15. 2023 will mark the 30th anniversary, our 30th anniversary as the Pacific Island Region's Intergovernmental Environment Organization. We continue to work according to the mandate given to us by our 26 member states, including 21 Pacific Island, small island developing states, 14 of whom are state parties to the CBD. Our mandate is to promote cooperation in the Pacific region and provide assistance in order to protect and improve its environment and to ensure sustainable development for present and future generations. Our vision as an organization is that we continue to have a Pacific environment that is sustaining our livelihoods and natural heritage in harmony with our cultures. Our Pacific Island leaders this year declared the Pacific Islands a region of ocean that we consider our blue Pacific continent that is larger than the combined land area of Canada, China, and the USA as an area under a state of climate emergency. We also face the other twin crises highlighted by the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. We are drowning under a sea of waste, and our island environments and ecosystems are under pressure from habitat destruction and species loss, or species that are under threat. Island ecosystems have the dubious distinction of having the highest rate of extinctions globally. We have assisted our members to prepare for COP-15, and they have come here with 4 Pacific priorities. The first is to adopt an effective and coherent global biodiversity framework. I look forward to this becoming a reality at the end of this COP. The recognition that the Pacific Islands region faces unique biodiversity conservation and management issues due to our geographic isolation, limited land areas, and vast ocean spaces. In other words, the special case for SIDS. We need investments in capacity to manage and monitor biodiversity, especially the human actions impacting island biodiversity. Our 4th priority is that healthy ocean biodiversity should be a global priority. Unfortunately, we are still weighted too much towards terrestrial biodiversity. We should respect those countries that only have a lot of ocean biodiversity and give it the same weighting. Our region is ready to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework, and our Secretariat commits to facilitate implementation by integrating it within existing regional implementation mechanisms. The 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, approved by our leaders in July this year, is the framework for sustainable development within our region up to 2050. And through the thematic pillars of climate change, ocean, and environment, we will implement the GBF. We have already approved the framework for nature conservation and protected areas in the Pacific region, 2021 to 2025. That is our regional strategy for biodiversity conservation in the Pacific. It was endorsed by almost 2,000 participants at our 10th Pacific Island Conference on Nature Conservation and Protected Areas in 2020, and approved by the members of the SPREP Governing Council at their 2021 meeting. We have integrated what we anticipated would be in the Global Biodiversity Framework, and will revise once it's adopted to fully integrate it within our regional framework. We utilize the Pacific Islands Roundtable for Nature Conservation, a coalition of our state members, nature conservation and development organizations, intergovernmental organizations, and donor agencies created to increase effective conservation action in the Pacific Islands region in 1998 as the coordinating body for implementation, not only for our regional framework, but also for the Global Biodiversity Framework. This body is currently chaired by the BirdLife International, so we fully integrate NGOs within our governance mechanisms. As its Secretariat, we urge our parties to strengthen implementation of the Nouméa Convention, the Pacific's Regional Seas Convention. We will assist our members to revise their NBSAPs to integrate national actions to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework. We will continue to build the capacity and assist our members with implementation. We will work with our donors and member states to develop and implement effective projects and programs to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework. Finally, I wish to thank our members, especially Australia, France, and New Zealand, for their extra budgetary project and technical support, and those that partner and fund our work in biodiversity conservation, including the Global Environment Facility, the European Union, UNEP, the Pew Charitable Trust, and the CURE Initiative. I thank you for your attention.
I thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to Vice President, Risk and Compliance, Chief Risk Officer of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Ms. Anna-Marie Strahoff.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the CBD and the government of China for inviting me to speak today at the high-level segment of this COP. Last year in Glasgow, multilateral development banks, including the EBRD, issued a joint statement on nature, people and planet. We did this because we were painfully aware of the climate and biodiversity interrelated crisis the world is suffering. Climate change accelerates biodiversity loss, and healthy ecosystems offer affordable solutions to tackle climate change. And the protection and sustainable management of our natural capital should provide fair livelihoods for all. We need to firmly act on both crises and act quickly. In our statement, we committed to further mainstream nature in our operations, focusing on 5 areas. Firstly, by showing MDB leadership on the subject, including in the update of our policies. Secondly, by scaling up nature-positive investments. Thirdly, by fostering regional synergies to achieve systemic impacts. Fourthly, by valuing nature to guide decision-making. And finally, through improving available biodiversity data. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, due to its region of operations and its private sector mandate, has long focused on the upgrade of depleted environmental infrastructure and the recovery of degraded ecosystems. Inspired by this multilateral momentum, we have taken action on all the areas previously mentioned in coordination with other IFIs. As announced at COP-27, MDBs will focus on biodiversity and nature in a joint working group. I would like to highlight 3 initiatives. First, we are developing a joint MDB positive taxonomy for nature to accelerate and better track investments. Second, we are developing a natural capital valuation model and launched a nature risk assessment pilot. Third, together with the European Investment Bank and the Union for the Mediterranean, we launched a Blue Mediterranean Partnership during COP27 to help reverse ecosystem degradation in the Mediterranean and in the Red Seas. To conclude, we need to scale up nature-positive investments and expand our focus from projects to systemic impacts. And we need to help create effective market mechanisms which recognize biodiversity benefits and help reorient capital flows. The path ahead of us is complex, but the destination is clear. We must halt biodiversity loss and reverse trends as soon as possible. We need to take full advantage of the Montreal momentum. Nature, people, and the planet deserve no less. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. Next, we have the representative of the LAS and then the International Whaling Commission and the African Development Bank. First of all, I give the floor to the representative of the League of Arab States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish at the outset to thank the governments of China and Canada, as well as the Secretariat of the CBD. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today I take part in this meeting as a representative of the League of Arab States and the spokesperson of the technical committee of the Arab ministers charged with environmental issues. This is a regional Arab initiative of the League of Arab States aiming for cooperation in all areas of the environment and sustainable development. At the Council of Arab ministers charged with environmental issues, we have always been aware of the issues linked to constant loss of natural resources and land degradation, which undermines the efforts and the capacities in the region to achieve food security. Thus, the need to properly cooperate and coordinate amongst all international partners. This is a unique opportunity for parties to join together to slow the degradation of ecosystems by targeting those vulnerable ecosystems in the region. As we place important attention on many of these issues of environmental protection, we have undertaken several measures, including the creating of the Arab Union of Natural Reserves under the Joint Arab Actions of the League of Arab States. We have focused also on the environmental aspect of the SDGs while working with specialized Arab organizations as well as international and regional organizations. We are aiming for a global biodiversity framework which can ensure the sustainable use of all elements of biodiversity, as well as the just and equitable sharing of genetic resources so as to achieve the elimination of poverty and to ensure food security. I thank you.
I thank you for your intervention, and I now give the floor to the representative of the International Whaling Commission, please.
Thank you, Chair. The International Whaling Commission recently celebrated its 75th anniversary, which makes us one of the oldest biodiversity-related conventions in this room. On behalf of our 88 members, we've been pleased to join with our biodiversity partners over the past few years in negotiating the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Mr. Chair, whales and other cetaceans are a key part of the global ecosystem, adding to the productivity of the environment. In fact, science shows that whales, large whales, act as ecosystem engineers and add to the carbon sequestration of the oceans and become part of nature's solution to climate change. Indeed, the present value of carbon sequestration of one whale during its lifetime, along with its other contributions to the economy, is estimated by the International Monetary Fund to be as high as $2 million US. Now, the IWC's scientific and conservation committees are the global epicenter of cetacean expertise, and at the direction of our commission, they conduct research on ecosystem contributions of cetaceans and a wide array of other topics. Commercial whaling remains under a global moratorium. However, the IWC continues to review the sustainability of harvest limits for aboriginal subsistence whaling. But today's threats to cetacean populations are no longer from direct harvest, but rather from the unintended impacts of other human activities, such as fishing, shipping, plastics, and other pollution, and climate change. This means that considerable collaboration is needed, and we are grateful to our colleagues at the FAO, the IMO, the SPREP, the biodiversity MEAs for support. Conservation and stewardship of marine mammals is challenging even when we have perfect information about the species and its threats and the solutions. And this is sadly the case for the vaquita in the Gulf of California and the North Atlantic right whale off the east coast of North America. But on a more positive note, the IWC offers perhaps the strongest proof that late action can still be successful with collaboration and commitment. And the best of several examples is the slow but steady recovery of blue whales in the Antarctic from the brink of extinction. Mr. Chair, the IWC's work program for science and stewardship is in line with the targets and goals of the GBF, and we stand ready to work with our partners in rising to the challenge. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you for your remarks. After the African Development Bank, we have Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, and the European Environment Protection Agency. First of all, I give the floor to the African Development Bank.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I would like to start by thanking the host country, the People's Republic of China, Canada, and the Convention on Biological Diversity for inviting the African Development Bank to take part in this very important conference at a time when nature is in crisis. I bring greetings from the African Development Bank Group and express our fervent desire that this COP-15 delivers on its set objectives and that we can implement a post-2020 global diversity framework in a manner that ensures equity, fairness, and sustainable use of natural resources for development. An ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework gives us the opportunity to innovate and break out of silos through nature-based approaches to preserve biodiversity and nature, which sustain our communities and economies. It is also the best way to improve the livelihoods of millions of pastoralists, farmers, fishermen, young people, and women across the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, the Congo Basin, and our marine and coastal areas. The coastal arm, the concessional arm of the African Development Bank Group, the African Development Fund, through its 16th replenishment, has just mobilized an billion.
They're trying to fix it.
Has just mobilized an unprecedented $8.9 billion for Africa's low-income and fragile states, which depend on the fund, including a new climate action window of $429 million. One of the important commitments under this replenishment is to support African countries in generating country-specific knowledge, capacity building, and mobilizing resources towards biodiversity and natural capital finance. As Africa's premier development finance institution, the African Development Bank is set to lead on the biodiversity agenda on the continent by mainstreaming biodiversity in our investments and operations and exploring new and innovative financing solutions to support implementation of the global biodiversity framework on the ground in Africa. If there was ever a group that can shape success and deliver on preserving the world's biological diversity, it is all of us in this room today. So let us rise to this noble challenge. Let's find the resources and start integrating the value of nature in our economies, financial systems, and policies to create shared economic prosperity. Let us leave the past behind and focus on a more sustainable economic development path that accounts for people, climate, and nature. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Conservation International. Please.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. This has been a year of conferences. At each event, one thing is abundantly clear. The energy transition is well underway. There's no longer a question of if, it's a matter of how quickly. And this is good news, of course. But right now, we cannot say the same about the nature-positive transition. I am gravely concerned about species loss and its long and short-term consequence for jobs, economies, and the fabric of life on our planet. But there is one thing that lifts my spirit, the ambition that I've seen among you here. We cannot let that momentum go to waste. We must leave Montreal with bold targets and financing at hand. To be clear, goal setting is not the easy part, though. Targets are not the end game. Target will not pull us back from the brink. That requires vision, leadership, and capital. The biggest challenge before us is closing the biodiversity funding gap. Whether number you pick, it's enormous. Our war on nature has gone on for a long time now, but success is more within our reach than not. First, because eliminating subsidies will go a long way to move us from activities that deplete and destroy and towards those that replenish and restore. This is what fueled the transition to a nature-positive economy. Second, because we are living in a golden age of science. Every day, there are new technologies, new insights that help multiply the return on every dollar invested in nature. For example, Conservation International scientists recently found that 3/4 of the world's irrevocable carbon, the carbon that we cannot lose, and 91% of the terrestrial vertebrates can be found on just 14% of Earthland. This gives us a fighting chance if we prioritize them. Because indigenous people and local communities have kept much of what we will need still relatively intact through their stewardship, there is no excuse for delaying actions another 2 years. We have the tools, we have the expertise, and we know exactly which places are the most important for biodiversity, climate, and human well-being. And we have the models to sustainably finance our efforts. There is no one else coming to save us. This is it. We are it. And if we simply wait for a change to arrive, it will never come. But if we can lead with courage and curiosity, if we can temporarily forsake convenience and convention, and then with conviction, then a giant leap forward is possible. Today, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you for your statement, and I now invite the representative of Nature Conservancy.
请把麦克风给大自然保护协会。哦。
Microphone to TNC. You can say TNC. TNC is the abbreviation. TNC is the abbreviation.
就是那个 TNC， 然后让他们找一下麦克风。
麦克风。
Oh là là. 大自然 Please give the mic to TNC, the Nature Conservancy. Is the mic on for you now? Let's switch to the next, and before we come back to TNC. Now, I give the floor to the European Environment Protection Society or Association.
欧洲环保协会，请把麦克风给。
European Environment Protection. Please turn the mic on.
The next is ClientEarth. We can call ClientEarth.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to TNC.
Already called. Christine already called.
Now, 现在可以了吗？
Is it working now? So the European Environment Agency, is your mic working?
That's the next one.
It's done? Okay. Excellencies, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues and I at TNC have heard so many stories of hope and change over the past few days. Indigenous communities across Canada reclaiming their traditions and their future. Countries such as Haiti who are making outstanding efforts to support their protected areas despite daunting economic conditions. Youth clamoring for a future in which the natural world is respected and conserved and continues to provide physical and spiritual sustenance to them and their children. Businesses sincerely trying to understand biodiversity and work to reduce their impacts and be transparent about their dependence on nature. This conference cannot let them down. Efforts of these individuals, communities, and enterprises are inspiring and needed, but they are not enough. They must be supported by the collective actions of the international community, by a global agreement of the entire community of nations committing themselves to economic and social transformation. That is what will bring real change, and that is what is needed to heal the natural world. The negotiation of a global biodiversity framework was always going to present a challenge. We are grateful for the perseverance of parties to continue deliberations despite the pandemic challenges and delays, to start this hard work online with extra meetings and to kickstart essential discussions. The willingness of many countries to find new and additional biodiversity finance during these times of unrest and economic uncertainty, including the announcements made yesterday, have also been very heartening. A transformational agreement is within our grasp, an agreement that sets us on a pathway to halt and reverse nature loss through clear and specific actions. Actions that transform our food systems to be resilient and sustainable, that reduce harm from all of our industrial sectors, that protect 30% of all natural ecosystems, that support the rights of Indigenous people to manage their territories and resources sustainably, and that support the climate mitigation and adaptation needs by using nature. And, of course, actions that generate the resources and a transformed mindset to get all of these things done. The Nature Conservancy stands ready to work in partnership with parties and with all stakeholders to apply the expertise of our 4,000 scientists and conservationists around the world to find pathways to implement this convention fully. Together, we can achieve a nature-positive world. Thank you.
Now I give the floor to the representative of the European Environment Agency. Is your microphone working now?
ClientEarth, that's true.
Anyone? Hello? Finally. So thank you, Minister Zhao, my friend. Dear Excellencies, I might look like a white guy, but actually I've lived and worked in China for the last 20 years, and I've been supporting the biodiversity negotiations since 2018. Amazing progress has been made, and so I want to thank all of you for your hard work. We are on the cusp of a historic moment for the planet. And in the final stage, I think maybe what's most needed really is a bit of trust in each other. And especially the presidency, China, is probably going to play an important role. So where are we at? We've heard calls for 30 by 30, and the presidency gets that. We've heard calls for much more resource mobilization and solidarity with developing countries, and the presidency gets that. We've heard calls for an effective implementation mechanism, and the presidency gets that. We've heard calls for corporate disclosure and the presidency gets that. We've heard calls to recognize the link between climate and biodiversity, and the presidency gets that. And we've heard calls to respect indigenous people's rights and local communities, and the presidency gets that too. I know the presidency wants the GBF to be not just ambitious, but for it to be really achieved by 2030. When I say work in China on environmental issues, people often say, oh my God, that must be so difficult. Actually, it's not, because there is a very strong political commitment in China for the environment. China didn't wait for the GBF to be finalized. In fact, transformative change is well underway in China already. China has hammered on illegal wildlife trade, causing stocks of ivory, rhino horns, and pangolin scales to pile up in transit countries. China has established more than 2,000 environmental courts, and prosecutors have been bringing thousands of cases for the environment against local governments, against companies that harm the environment. China is already effectively conserving, protecting 31% of its land in the ecological conservation red lines. At the same time, great strides have been made in development, and so China is showing that conservation and development can go hand in hand. And the Chinese government has asked ClientEarth to help developing policies to control mitigation, to mitigate deforestation risk in China's soft commodity supply chains. That could be a major boost for biodiversity conservation and climate change in the world. So, ministers, negotiators, in the final days, please place some trust in one another. Please come together. ClientEarth will play its role in the implementation of the GBF using the power of the law. Thank you all for getting this over the line on behalf of ClientEarth, on behalf of myself, and on behalf of my daughters, Lisa and Linda. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. De Boer, for your statement. Now, the representative of Avaz, IISD, and the IOC will be taking the floor. First, I invite the representative of Avaz to take the floor.
My name is Bert Wander, and I'm the acting CEO of Avaz, a campaigning community of millions of people from all over the world. Avaz means voice or song, and I'm speaking today to deliver more than 3 million citizens' voices from all over the world who are part of Avaz's campaign to put half the earth under protection by 2030. But I'm also speaking to you today on behalf of all the non-human voices that aren't heard at political negotiations like this. I'm speaking on behalf of the last Kauai O'o, whose song rained down from a treetop at sunset, calling for a mate who would never come. I'm speaking on behalf of Spix's macaw, the western black rhino, the golden toad, all torn from the great tapestry of life, wiped out by a single species of bald ape that emerged from East Africa just 200,000 years ago. Humans, us. And if we are the cause, we can stop it. Today, 1 million species are clinging on in the face of extinction. Birds and plants and animals whose fate is being decided here, decided now, decided by you. If they could speak, they'd tell us that the earth doesn't belong to us. They'd say that we belong to the earth. They tell us that everything we do to the earth, we do to ourselves, that their fate is our fate. That is the wisdom at the heart of many of our longest surviving cultures, and it is wisdom that we desperately need. Because the truth is, we aren't here to protect nature, we are nature, trying to protect itself. And for all the hard work and the rare successes we've seen, species by lost species, habitat by lost habitat, to date, we have failed. But here, now, You have a chance to begin to turn this round. To miss it would be unforgivable, but to take it would be historic. That means protecting half the Earth by 2030. It means making sure the money is there to pay for it. It means real protections and direct funding for indigenous people and local communities based on respect, humility, and partnership. To succeed, we must all be prepared to compromise. Not to do what is easy, but to do what is necessary in the face of this extinction crisis. You have all the public support you need. 3,298,135 Avaz members from almost every country on this beautiful earth urging you to end the destruction of the web of life. They are urging you to do it together, and they're urging you to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative, that is the President and CEO of the IISD, Dr. Richard Florizon. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, let me join others in thanking the People's Republic of China as president of the CBD Conference of the Parties and as host of the second part of COP-15 Canada for the opportunity to contribute to this high-level segment. Here in Montreal, on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka and a gathering place for many First Nations, we've heard repeatedly about the dire need for immediate, decisive action to conserve biodiversity, sustainably use it, and ensure fair and equitable sharing of its benefits. My organization, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, or IISD, joins governments and other partners in committing to the successful and rapid implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework that we hope will be concluded this weekend, the GBF. How will we achieve that rapid implementation? I would like to focus on 3 points: transparency, financing, and nature-positive climate solutions. First, transparency. Through IISD's Earth Negotiations Bulletin and Global Communications Network, we'll continue to ensure that CBD parties and civil society have timely access to the latest information and analysis on the negotiations. Transparency is crucial so that everyone from developing countries to indigenous peoples and local communities can shape the final outcome, but also, of course, that we can all hold each other to account. Second is finance. Now, as we prepare for the GBF's implementation, we face some sobering financial estimates. New UNEP data confirms that the level of finance going towards nature-based solutions must increase threefold by 2030, a very significant number. Some of this investment must go to nature-based infrastructure projects, which are often more cost-effective and beneficial than traditionally engineered infrastructure. At IISD, we have a nature-based infrastructure global resource center that is working with the GEF and UNIDO on new approaches to drive greater investment in these nature-based solutions and these infrastructure projects in over 40 countries over the next 3 years. We also in finance must tackle harmful subsidies in line with the GBF's draft Target 18. This year, WTO members took a great step in the right direction with the new Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, but we need to do more. Simply put, we need to stop putting money in things we don't want and put that money towards things that we do. Finally, I want to talk about nature-positive climate solutions. At IISD, we are directly supporting over 50 developing countries through our NAP Global Network to help them develop their NAPs, or National Adaptation Plans. We're home to the Nature for Climate Adaptation Initiative, where we're providing a space for those people working on nature-positive solutions to climate change, whether in the context of their national adaptation plans or local projects and communities. Again, we need to invest in nature for its own good, but also recognizing that there are so many co-benefits to nature-based solutions that can not just improve biodiversity, but can have an impact on climate mitigation and make our communities more resilient to climate change. Wherever we land this weekend, whatever emerges from COP-15, addressing the global biodiversity crisis and securing a nature-positive future requires our collective ambition and our collective action. IISD looks forward to working with all of you to take on this challenge with our partners to build a world where people and planet thrive. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I'd like to remind all the speakers, please press just once the microphone button so that the technicians can locate you properly. Now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the IOC.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the hosts, and thank you to everyone who is still here with us this evening. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm honored to be speaking to you on behalf of the International Olympic Committee and the broader sport community represented by the Olympic movement. We know biodiversity is the foundation of all life on Earth, and its loss threatens the future of all humanity, and sport, too, is affected by it. Whether it's on the mountains, on the water, in the cities, sport depends on nature, the clean air and the water it provides. We recognize that sport has an impact on nature, but sport can also play an important role in protecting it. That is why here at COP-15, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, together with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the UN Environment Programme, and the Convention on Biological Diversity has launched the Sport for Nature framework. The framework's aim is to rally the sport community to deliver nature-positive action by 2030, committing to 4 goals. First, protecting and avoiding damage to natural habitats and species. Second, taking specific positive action to restore and regenerate nature in and around environments where sport operates. Third, reducing risks to nature and enabling opportunities to conserve and restore it within its supply chains. And fourth, educating and inspiring greater awareness and action for nature within the sport and wider communities. The framework provides a process for measurement and reporting. And this commitment is not new. It builds on the success of the United Nations Sport for Climate Action Framework, co-launched in 2018 by UN Climate Change and the IOC. Recognizing the intrinsic role of nature-based solutions in addressing climate change, it complements this work. It also builds on the IOC's own efforts to address the climate and biodiversity crisis, reducing emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, prioritizing existing infrastructure for Olympic Games, and creating an Olympic forest to help restore degraded land in Mali and Senegal. The United Nations 2030 Agenda recognizes sport as an important enabler of sustainable development, and we are keen to support the post-2022 Global Biodiversity Framework as part of the whole-of-society approach that is so urgently needed. Learning to overcome challenges is one of the skills we learn through sport. Sport also teaches us that we can only overcome those challenges by working as a team. The challenge facing our planet requires each one of us in every sector to embrace that lesson and work together. And the Olympic movement, its over 80 recognized member sport federations, 206 Olympic committees, tens of thousands of athletes around the world, is committed to working with all of you as part of this team together. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The following 3 speakers are representatives from COMIFAC, International Chamber of Commerce, and BirdLife International. First, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of COMIFAC.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the Chinese and Canadian authorities for having organized such a successful COP-15 in Montreal, which also enabled me as president for the Central African Forest Commission to mention the importance our institution grants to the CBD and its implementation for a long-lasting planet and future generations. We'd also like to congratulate the parties for the ambitious targets, and effective implementation will allow us to live in harmony with nature. Ladies and gentlemen, COMIFAC is concerned with the Congo forests, which are some of the most dense and rich in the world in terms of biodiversity, and are a carbon sink for many hundreds of thousands of CO2. So African countries have made great strides in conservation of biodiversity with the creation of a number of protected areas. So we have some 206 protected areas, all categories combined, and I'm talking here about Central African countries, 24 million hectares of managed forests, much of it certified. And I would like to reiterate our profound gratitude for our technical and scientific partners who accompany us in the work we do to sustain the biodiversity framework. We want to promote good stewardship and preservation of forests, as well as the conservation of biodiversity, while respecting the rights of people, indigenous people, and local communities. We also are working to implement policies and legislations for the access to genetic resources and equitable sharing of their benefits. The countries of COMIFAC would like to underscore the importance of the implementation, for the benefit of the states, measures to accompany Articles 3 and 4 of Article 20 of the CBD. Also, underscores the urgency of attending to the indigenous people, youth, and others in local communities. We encourage parties to approve the post-2020 biodiversity framework and find the means to implement, especially through the creation of a special fund dedicated to conservation and sustainable management of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the International Chamber of Commerce.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the International Chamber of Commerce and our network of 45 million companies in 170 countries, we express our deepest appreciation to the COP-15 President and the People's Republic of China for their leadership, to the Government of Canada for its hospitality, and to the CBD Secretariat for its work to prepare this meeting. We are at a pivotal point in history for the future of humanity and our planet. The science is clear, and the magnitude of the consequences of inaction even clearer. And the will and signals from business and other stakeholders to engage have never been stronger. COP-15 must demonstrate that governments are prepared to work together to address the biodiversity crisis at the speed and the scale needed to reverse nature loss. Multilateral collaboration and coherence across global environmental and sustainable development agendas are crucial to address global challenges and also to drive national implementation of solutions needed to transform economic and financial systems and to align public and private sector action and investments. Businesses from around the world have demonstrated here in Montreal that they are already taking action to integrate biodiversity into their strategies, operations, innovations, and investments. They are ready and willing to work with other stakeholders and to harness their skills, expertise, innovative capacity, investments, and influence to contribute to halting and reversing biodiversity loss. But to do this, business needs and has unequivocally called for an effective and ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. This should provide clear pathways for business action supported by the necessary tools and coordinated government policies that enable, incentivize, and accelerate positive outcomes in business operations and throughout value chains. The framework should also promote increased transparency and disclosure against universally accepted frameworks through clear and balanced reporting requirements that reflect business realities. Business is also calling for simple, workable, and legally certain outcomes from the DSI discussions that will support and accelerate the research and innovation efforts in all countries, which will be crucial to achieve biodiversity and other sustainable development goals. We look to you to lead in identifying points of convergence to move towards an international consensus. Only this will secure this historic opportunity to develop a global agreement that rallies all actors in the collective challenge of halting and reversing nature loss, including setting the direction for game-changing business action. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of BirdLife International.
Excellencies, dear delegates, as the UN Secretary General stated at the opening of COP-15, humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction. We know this from painful experience. 1 in 8 bird species are now threatened with extinction, such as the culturally significant Antipodean albatross, a cultural tauna for Maori, a species whose population is being decimated by poor practices in fisheries across the Pacific. The biodiversity apocalypse is being felt now, on the ground. In lockstep with the climate crisis, this threatens to undermine the very fabric of our society, our future, our survival. The 119 civil society partner organizations that make the BirdLife family around the world have been on the front line working to save species from the brink of extinction, hand in hand with local communities and indigenous people and supporting willing governments. Whether it is bringing back the Alagoas Anren back from extinction in Brazil, or working hand in hand with governments and communities in the Great Green Wall in Nigeria and Liberia, just to cite a couple of examples, our partners around the world know that we need an ambitious global biodiversity framework with clear and measurable targets and a very strong commitment to implementation right away with significant funding. It is time to forge a peace plan with nature. It is time to reconcile our relationship with the planet. We need to remember that less than 1% of the global GDP is needed to protect 30% of the lands and seas of the planet. We just need strong political will. We need you. We need strong commitments on reducing the drivers of biodiversity loss alongside with a robust set of enabling conditions that will provide the groundwork for a transformational change. These include a mission which truly reflects our collective ambition to halt and reverse biodiversity loss to be nature positive by 2030. The full integration of a human rights-based approach which recognizes and actively delivers the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The agreement of a global target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's land and ocean by 2030, which fully acknowledges the rights and stewardship role of indigenous peoples and local communities. The funding on the table now to kickstart implementation with a sustained increase in these funds alongside the elimination of subsidies harmful to nature to close the funding gap for biodiversity. These must be backed by a strong implementation mechanism without which we risk to repeat the failure of Aichi. Humanity may create huge challenges, but with collective determination and strong political will, we can also reverse them. We are looking to you, ministers assembled here in Montreal, for your leadership, for the leadership of an ambitious nation collective nations who have committed to act in accordance with the scale of the crisis at hand, an ambition which has sadly not been apparent over the last 2 weeks. The world is watching. We, over 119 partners, over 11 million members, we are watching. The momentum from all sectors of civil society, from indigenous groups to financial institutions, is currently outstripping the momentum in the negotiations. In the margins of these discussions, where you are looking to compromise, we're asking you to be bold, to make history, to help us, yourselves, our future, to have a horizon. We need nothing less than transformative change. Don't be caught on the wrong side of history. We must act for nature, act for biodiversity, act for humanity. We're in your hands.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the following 3 representatives are from Future Earth, Wildlife Conservation Society, and Greenpeace International. So I give the floor now to the representative of Future Earth.
The biodiversity and climate crises are being driven by the same anthropogenic drivers. Solutions are within reach if we tackle both in tandem, working towards a just and equitable world. Last month's climate COP-27 created momentum, with climate decisions mentioning biodiversity and with a breakthrough finance mechanism for loss and damage. Ambitious goals for biodiversity can only be achieved through urgent transformative action that encompasses solutions across the social, economic, and political spectrum. Our organization, Future Earth, convenes researchers across the globe from a range of disciplines to co-produce knowledge with a diversity of stakeholders. We are uniquely placed to support the Convention on Biological Diversity and parties in implementing a post-2020 global biodiversity framework by providing the necessary research that brings about transformation. Let us name some examples. The science briefs developed by Biodiscovery in collaboration with Geobon have provided parties with an updated assessment and recommendations for selected targets on how to achieve the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The Global Mountain Biodiversity Assessments Mountain Portal provides accessible, up-to-date information on the state of biodiversity in the mountain regions of our planet. 10 Facts on Land, developed by the Global Land Programme, explain the challenges of achieving sustainability in land use as a guide for policymakers and practitioners. In our Canada Hub, we are working to elevate Indigenous knowledge systems around nature stewardship. Lastly, the Earth Commission assesses the latest science to define safe and just Earth system boundaries for people and planet, supporting the development of science-based targets for Earth systems such as land, water, biodiversity, and others. An Earth Commission scientific study on achieving a nature-positive and people-positive future, published in the journal One Earth as the COP started, re-emphasized what many have been stating throughout the last 3 years. Based on the paper, with partners, we initiated a global online call for signatories that, as of 9:30 p.m. in Montreal on 16th December, now has almost 3,300 signatories from researchers and scientists from over 125 countries. The number increases every hour, which we will report daily as the COP approaches its final hours. The science is clear. We reiterate the global call for governments to act immediately to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. This will require real ambition in the agreed 2030 targets in 3 critical areas. To halt and begin to reverse loss of ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity and invest in measures that effectively put them on paths to recovery. To reduce direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss to sustainable levels across all major production and consumption sectors. Achieving this will require wealthy countries and sectors of society to rapidly reduce their shares and impacts of consumption to achieve a more equitable distribution. Without all 3 of these actions, we cannot halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Future Earth commits to continue its long-standing collaboration with the Convention on Biological Diversity, providing interdisciplinary research and support of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We support a framework that describes clear, measurable, and ambitious goals to catalyze corresponding action from all sectors of society across all targets. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. Now I'll give the floor to the representative of Wildlife Conservation Society. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Wildlife Conservation Society would like to extend our gratitude to China as the COP presidency and to Canada as co-host of COP-15 for bringing us together for these critical negotiations. I am proud to be speaking on behalf of my WCS colleagues from across 60 countries who have been providing the science and expertise for the Global Biodiversity Framework and who have been involved in the negotiations for close to 4 years. On behalf of WCS, we have 3 messages. First, that the science is clear, that the 3 existential crises and interrelated crises of our day, the collapse of biodiversity, climate change, and the persistent threat of pandemics of zoonotic origin, all result from a degradation and destruction of nature. Our first responsibility, therefore, must be to prevent further degradation and loss of ecological integrity, particularly in our most highly intact and biodiversity terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Ambitious actions outlined in the conservation targets of the GBF are a precondition for halting and reversing biodiversity loss and achieving an equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future. We urge you to adopt such a GBF. Fortunately, our second message is that we have proven tools to reverse biodiversity loss. For example, protected and conserved areas, when designed and managed equitably with indigenous peoples and local communities, are demonstrably effective in addressing all 3 crises. We should build on these successes, including adopting a target to protect and conserve at least 30% of land and oceans by 2030. This effort must, of course, be complemented by other policy actions to redirect harmful incentives, to transform our food systems, and to radically increase global support to countries and communities that do most for global biodiversity, yet suffer the most from our collective impacts. Our final message is that an ambitious framework presents an extraordinary opportunity to restore our broken relationship with nature. COP-15 could be the catalyst for a renaissance of nature, one that secures lives and economies, prevents the pathogen spillovers that could and likely will lead to future pandemics of zoonotic origin, stabilizes local and global climate systems, and provides agency and security for peoples and cultures who have built interdependent relationships with biodiversity that we must learn from. Let us be emboldened by what we could achieve. It is within our power to transform the trajectory of nature, but incremental political and financial commitments will fail the planet. Half measures will not deliver half the solution. Our response must be commensurate to the threats we face. If you, the parties, and ourselves do not truly commit to change our abusive relationship with nature here in Montreal, we will all be judged harshly by future generations, and rightly so. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greenpeace International. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to speak on behalf of Greenpeace and the millions of people who support Greenpeace. We are at a crucial moment for the future of life on Earth. You, here, will decide if it is a turning point. Deforestation, overfishing, mega-farming, and unchecked extraction of natural resources are driving the disappearance of species and biodiversity at a rate that is unprecedented in human history. Between climate change and ecosystem loss, 1 million species are now threatened by extinction. But the discussions here have been painfully slow. This pedestrianism stands in great contrast to the level of ambition and action the crisis demands. We must put Indigenous rights front and center. Evidence from every continent consistently shows that Indigenous peoples are the most capable and responsible stewards of biodiversity. It is no surprise that 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is concentrated in Indigenous territories, which cover just 1/5 of land and coastal marine areas globally. We hope that parties here are not simply paying lip service to the inclusion of Indigenous rights and to the recognition of their roles and traditional knowledge, but that you will cement it in the new GBF. We need ambitious nature protection targets. Scientists have clearly told us what is needed to make sure we can sustain healthy ecosystems on this planet. The high seas, especially, are hugely exposed. Only 1% is effectively protected. Without a network of highly and fully protected marine areas covering at least 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, it will be impossible to sustain the web of life. But real ambition is more than a number, and we call on blue leaders and all of you who have committed to making these areas highly and fully protected to be true to your rhetoric here in Montreal. And to make this all real, we can't leave without concrete plans to implement the GBF as soon as possible. We are facing a biodiversity finance gap of around $700 billion. We must shift subsidies and investments away from industries that destroy nature, but that alone cannot satisfy the resource and capacity building needs of many countries. Majority world delegates should not have to return home from yet another COP without real funding commitments from the global north. Fair and equitable treatment is just a slogan unless it is underpinned by the guarantee of sufficient resources. The natural world has many languages of its own. It cannot speak to us in ours, but it is speaking to us nonetheless. And we must listen. We must find the will to make this moment a true turning point for nature. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speakers will be our last three in-person speakers. They are respectively SNAP Quebec, World Resources Institute, and Local Governments for Sustainability, ICLE. So now I give the floor to the representative of SNAP Quebec.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am here to represent the Quebec civil society, which has worked over the past few months to meet with more than 100 organizations and has organized more than 60 events under COP-15. And we have seized the call of the IPBES, which is called for systemic changes in our economic models, and changes in our value systems. Civil society in Quebec brings together a large conference at the international level on solutions to this decline in biodiversity, and these are those people who are also responsible for the climate crisis. Here we have two goals. One, to open the dialogue, a difficult dialogue on how can we change the world? How can we change this economic model? And how can we bring change to our value system? And I think that we've been able to open this dialogue. Our second goal was to send a message so that all the upcoming climate and biodiversity COPs will never fail to discuss the root causes of this decline in biodiversity. There's nothing better than a toy from our childhood that helps us to understand climate change and the land limits. Everybody knows that if I continue to blow into this balloon, the physical limits of the balloon will lead to it exploding. And it's the same thing for terrestrial resources. We need to find a way to find the proper size for our economy. We need to find a way to make our economy work so that it is stable. And it is urgent to address this issue. And if we are unable to overcome this challenge, that of changing our economic models and our economic growth, then this could be what it leads to. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your intervention. I was told that the representative of the World Resources Institute is not in his or her seat. Is the representative of the World Resources Institute present? If not, we will come to the last speaker, namely the representative of the local governments for sustainability.
Your Excellencies, ICLEI, as a network of over 2,500 committed cities and subnational governments, has worked closely with the CBD Secretariat and parties since COP-8 to engage cities and subnational governments in COP processes and platforms, providing an enabling environment for collective action for vibrant cities where people and nature can thrive in harmony. We know that if we do not restore peace with nature now, also in the context of our shared urban future, irreversible tipping points will cause irreparable damage to the critical ecosystems that sustain all life on Earth. No city can afford to undervalue or take nature for granted, nor make decisions that are not nature positive. The readiness to act is demonstrated by political and technical leaders of 237 cities from 69 countries who participated in the 7th Summit for Subnational Governments and Cities at COP-15 in this room, which represents an historic global mobilization of local governments supporting the CBD parties, as was evident in the live-streamed summit in our first ever subnational government and cities pavilion, which together showcased best practices and innovation from cities and provinces around the world. We thank the Government of Quebec, our main sponsor of the 7th Summit and Pavilion, Montreal and Kunming, Yunnan Province, the CBD Secretariat, Regions 4 and UNEP, our main partners at COP15. We also witnessed at least 36 new cities and several new partners, including the World Health Organization, joining Cities with Nature as a global initiative, which already sees over 200 individual local commitments on its new action platform. Several launches and announcements took place here at COP15, indicating raised ambition and a sense of urgency, such as the new Berlin Urban Nature Pact, linked to Cities with Nature, which also supports the Singapore's Cities Biodiversity Index, now available in more languages than ever before. Cities' ambition and pivotal implementation roles are recognized in various texts in the Global Biodiversity Framework and reflected well in item 16b, which are still being negotiated by the parties. Please adopt these. I thank the Scottish Government for their leadership in the Edinburgh process. ICLEI is proud to be among the first to sign the Edinburgh Declaration and remains a core partner in this process. The strength of cities is our ability to deliver action locally, and actions are best delivered when we collaborate. Together, we can support the parties significantly in achieving global biodiversity targets, thereby ensuring a nature-positive future for all, also in our cities, where more than half of humanity already resides. Thank you.
I thank you for your remarks. That concludes our list of in-person statements. As our interpreters can work till 10 p.m. tonight, so we need to conclude the meeting by 10 p.m. So unfortunately, we don't have much more time to broadcast the video statements. But the video statements will become part of the records of the proceedings. I asked the Secretariat to upload to the website those statements. I thank all the representatives for your statements and for your understanding. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we will have the closing plenary of the high-level segment, mainly to take stock of the main points of the statements. Once again, I thank you for your statements, and please enjoy your evening. Thank you.